There is a tribe in the Brazilian Amazon, the Piraha, who have no word for the future. Linguists who lived among them came back with the same unsettling report. These people do not store food. They do not plan past tomorrow. They do not, by any measure we recognize, worry, and they are, by their own account and by every observer, among the most contented humans on the planet. Now hold that against your own skull for a second. You have 1,000 words for the future, and you wake up already losing a fight that hasn't started. Here is what almost nobody understands about that. The dread you feel is not a reaction to your life. It is a prediction about it. And the brain that makes the prediction is the same organ that then walks you obediently toward it. So the real question isn't whether you'll win. It's whether you can hijack the machine that's already decided you won't. Your brain is not a camera. This is the single most expensive misunderstanding you carry. And once you see past it, you cannot unsee it. You think your eyes record the world and hand it to you, raw and true. They don't. The neuroscientist Carl Jung spent decades building the case that the brain is fundamentally a prediction engine. It is constantly generating a model of what it expects to happen next, and then it checks reality against that model. What you experience as the present moment is not the world arriving. It is your brain's best guess about the world, corrected at the edges by whatever sensory data contradicts the guess loudly enough. Sit with the implication. You are not seeing your life. You are seeing your forecast of your life, lightly edited by events. Which means the man who expects to fail and the man who expects to win are not two people with different attitudes about the same reality. They are two people inhabiting different realities, built by different prediction engines, each one quietly editing out the evidence that doesn't fit. The pessimist isn't being negative, he's being efficient. His brain has stopped wasting energy modeling outcomes it has already ruled impossible, and that is exactly the trap we're going to break open phase 1. The dogs that forgot they were free in 1967, in a laboratory at the University of Pennsylvania, a young Martin Seligman and his colleague Stephen Meyer ran an experiment that should have ended quietly and instead rewrote how we understand defeat. They took dogs and divided them into groups. One group received mild shocks they could stop by pressing a panel with their nose. They had control. The second group received the same shocks for the same duration, at the same moments, but nothing they did stopped them. The shocks came and went on a schedule the dogs could not touch. Then came the second day, and this is where it turns cold. Both groups of dogs were placed in a simple box with a low barrier down the middle. On one side, the floor delivered a shock. On the other side, safety. The barrier was a few inches high. Any dog could step over it without effort. The dogs who'd had control the day before felt the shock, scrambled, found the barrier, jumped it, and were free in seconds. The dogs who'd learned that nothing they did mattered lay down on the electrified floor and took it. The exit was inches away. They didn't look for it. They had learned in a single day that effort was pointless, and they carried that lesson into a situation where effort would have worked perfectly. Seligman called it learned helplessness. The phrase gets thrown around now like a self-help slogan, stripped of its teeth. So let me give you back the part that matters. The dogs were not weak. They were not broken by the cage. They were broken by a belief about the cage that outlived the cage itself. The bars were gone. The conclusion remained. And the conclusion did the work the bars used to do. Decades later, Seligman and Meyer admitted something that makes the whole thing worse. They had the mechanism backwards. The newer neuroscience showed that helplessness isn't learned at all. Passivity is the brain's default response to prolonged stress. What's actually learned, what the controllable group acquired, is the opposite, the discovery that you can act on your circumstances. Control is the thing that has to be taught. Giving up is what happens when nobody teaches it. Ride your own life through that lens for a moment. Every time you tried, and it didn't work, the application ignored, the message unanswered, the effort that vanished into nothing. Your brain wasn't just logging a disappointment. It was running the dog experiment on you. It was quietly building the model that says action and outcome are unrelated. And once that model sets, you stop jumping the barrier, not because you can't, but because some older part of you has already filed the verdict. It won't matter. That feeling you call realism, that measured certainty that the good thing won't happen for you specifically, it's not wisdom. It's a wound that learned to talk. Phase 2. The forecast writes the outcome. Let me show you how the prediction becomes the result. Because this is the part that turns philosophy into mechanism. In the 1960s, a researcher named Robert Rosenthal ran a study with an elementary school principal named Lenore Jacobson that exposed the whole mechanism. They gave students a standard IQ test. Then they told the teachers that certain children, randomly chosen, no different from the others, had scored as intellectual bloomers, poised for a dramatic leap that year. The names were drawn from a hat. The test said nothing about them. At the end of the year, they tested everyone again. The randomly labeled bloomers had genuinely pulled ahead. Their measured intelligence had risen measurably against classmates who started identical. Nothing had changed except what the teachers believed. And belief, it turned out, leaks. It leaks through the warmth of a glance held a half-second longer, through the harder question asked of the child you expect more from, through the extra beat of patience you extend to the one you've decided is worth it. The teachers never knew they were doing it. The children absorbed it anyway and became what they were expected to become. Now turn that machine on yourself, because you are running it every single day, except you are the teacher and the student at once. You hold a belief about what you're capable of, and that belief leaks into every micro-decision you make. The pessimist doesn't send the second email because why bother? He doesn't ask the harder question. He extends himself no patience. He treats himself the way Rosenthal's teachers treated the kids they'd written off, and he becomes exactly that. Not because the belief was true, but because the belief was load-bearing. This is the loop almost nobody escapes. Your prediction shapes your behavior. Your behavior shapes the outcome. The outcome confirms the prediction, and the loop tightens by one notch every time, until the thing you feared isn't a fear anymore. It's a habit wearing your face. There's a term for the crowbar that breaks this loop, and it comes from an unlikely place. Not philosophy. A clinic, phase 3. The surgery you can perform on your own thoughts in the 1960s. A psychiatrist named Aaron Beck noticed something his depressed patients all had in common, and it had nothing to do with their feelings. It had to do with their thinking. Beck was trained as a Freudian. He was supposed to dig into the buried past, the childhood, the repressed drives. Instead, he started actually listening to the sentences his patients said inside their own heads. What he called automatic thoughts, the fast, reflexive, barely noticed verdicts, the mind issues before you've had a chance to weigh in. He found they were riddled with the same distortions over and over, patient after patient, and he gave them names, because a thing you can name is a thing you can fight. Catastrophizing, taking one bad data point and extrapolating it into total ruin. The interview went badly, therefore I will never work again. Overgeneralization. One event becomes a permanent law. He didn't text back, therefore no one will ever want me. Mind reading, inventing the contents of other people's heads and treating the invention as fact. They think I'm a fraud. They were not impressed. None of it observed. All of it assumed, and then filed as evidence. Here's what Beck understood. Something the entire self-help industry that came after him has buried under affirmations and vision boards. You do not feel and then think. You think and then feel. The fast, distorted, unexamined thought comes first, and the emotion is downstream of it, which means the emotion is not the enemy. The thought that generated it is, and thoughts, unlike feelings, can be cross-examined. This is the move. When the dread arrives, you do not try to feel better. Feeling is the symptom, not the lever. You go upstream, and you find the sentence that produced the dread. You drag it into the light, and you put it on trial like a hostile witness. What is the actual evidence for this thought? What would I say to a friend who said it about themselves? Has this prediction ever been wrong before? Is there a single alternative explanation I have refused to consider because the catastrophe felt more familiar? It feels mechanical the first time. It feels like arguing with yourself in a language you don't speak. Do it anyway, because every distorted thought you successfully prosecute weakens the prediction engine's grip. And the prediction engine, remember, is the thing writing your future in advance. You are not trying to think positive. Positive thinking is a lie you tell over a foundation you haven't fixed, and the foundation always wins. You are trying to think accurately, and accuracy, for a mind that has spent years catastrophizing, looks almost indistinguishable from hope. That alone would be enough to change a life. But there's a layer underneath this, a biological one. And it's the part that explains why hard things feel impossible right up until the moment they don't, phase 4. The chemical that lies about, where the reward is everything you've been told about dopamine, is roughly half wrong. And the wrong half is the half that's keeping you stuck. You've heard it's the pleasure chemical, the little hit of joy when something good lands. That's not what it does. Dopamine is the molecule of anticipation. It fires hardest not when you receive the reward. It fires when you're reaching for it. It is the chemistry of pursuit, of the lean-forward hunger right before the thing arrives. And here's the cruelty built into your own wiring. Your brain runs on a dopamine baseline, a resting level that everything else is measured against. When you flood it with cheap, instant rewards, the scroll, the sugar, the notification, the easy win, you don't raise the baseline, you spike above it. And then the brain, which worships balance above all else, drags you back down below it to compensate. Anna Lembke at Stanford calls it the pleasure-pain seesaw. And it doesn't stop at level, it overshoots into deficit, which is why the man drowning in cheap stimulation feels worse, not better. He's living below his own baseline, needing the next hit just to climb back to the flat line everyone else stands on for free. Now here is the part that flips it into a weapon. The hard thing, the work, the discipline, the cold morning, the effort with no immediate payoff does the exact opposite. Andrew Huberman has spent years on the protocols around this, and the mechanism is brutal and beautiful at once. When you stop attaching dopamine to the reward at the end, and start attaching it to the effort itself, when you learn to find the difficulty subjectively rewarding while you're inside it, you raise your baseline. The struggle becomes the source. This is not a metaphor. This is the difference between the person who has to be dragged to the hard thing and the person who is pulled toward it. They are not built differently. One of them has learned to release dopamine during the struggle instead of after it. And once that switch flips, effort stops costing willpower and starts generating energy. The losing strategy is to grit your teeth and endure the work while telling yourself the reward comes later. That's a withdrawal with a delayed deposit, and your brain knows it. The winning strategy is to plant the reward inside the effort, to deliberately, consciously tell yourself that the hard part, the friction, is the point. It sounds like a mind game. It is a mind game. It also happens to be biochemically true. The Stoics were doing this 2,000 years before anyone could measure it. They didn't have the brain scans. They had the result. They understood that the man who learns to want the difficulty cannot be controlled by anyone who offers him comfort or threatens him with hardship, because he has relocated the reward to the one place no one else can reach, inside the doing. You have been chasing the finish line and wondering why you can't move. The people who move have stopped chasing the finish line. They fell in love with the friction. Phase 5. Recreate the self that keeps losing. There's a law in Robert Greene's collection that people misread constantly, and the misreading is what keeps them small. Law 25. Recreate yourself. Most people read that as branding. Build an image, manage how others see you. That's the shallow reading, and it's not wrong. but it's the part that doesn't matter. The part that matters is internal. The self you call me is not a fixed object. It is a story, a running narrative your prediction engine maintains about who you are, what you're capable of, and how things tend to go for someone like you. And here is a thing nobody wants to hear. That story was largely written by people who are not you, during years you don't fully remember, based on evidence that was incomplete and circumstances that no longer exist. You did not author the self that keeps losing. You inherited it, and you have been defending an inheritance you never chose as though it were your own face. Green's point, stripped to the bone, is that the masters of their own lives refused the role they were handed and cast themselves in a new one, not through delusion, through deliberate reconstruction. They treated identity the way a sculptor treats marble, as raw material, not a verdict. Consider Demosthenes, who is buried in this somewhere most people never look. The greatest orator of the ancient world was born with a speech impediment, so severe he was laughed off the platform the first time he tried to speak in public. He had a weak voice, shortness of breath, a stammer. By every measure of identity available to him, he was not an orator. The evidence said so, the audience said so. He went underground. He shaved half his own head, so vanity would keep him indoors until the work was done. He spoke with stones in his mouth to force his diction, recited verses while running uphill to build his breath, and practiced in front of a mirror to kill the movements that made crowds laugh. He did not accept the self the evidence handed him. He performed surgery on it, and he became the voice that nearly held off an empire. The point is not that you should put rocks in your mouth. The point is that Demosthenes understood, 23 centuries before Seligman, that the verdict the world hands you about who you are is not a fact. It is a starting position, and starting positions can be rebuilt by anyone willing to do the unglamorous, invisible. Lonely work in the room no one is watching. Your identity is the most powerful prediction your brain makes, because every other prediction flows from it. Change who you believe you are, and you change the forecast. Change the forecast and you change the behavior. Change the behavior and reality follows. It always follows last. That's why most people quit. They wait for reality to change first before they'll update the self. It runs the other direction. Phase 6. Why? You can't see the evidence that you're already winning. I want to come back to where we started, because there's a finding that closes the loop, and it might be the most important thing in this entire breakdown. A psychologist named Richard Wiseman spent 10 years studying people who described themselves as exceptionally lucky and exceptionally unlucky. He wanted to know if luck was real, or if it was something else wearing luck's clothing. In one experiment, he handed both groups the same newspaper and asked them to count how many photographs were inside. The unlucky people took about 2 minutes. The lucky people took seconds, because on the second page, in enormous type taking up half the page, was a message that read, "Stop counting. There are 43 photographs." The unlucky people braced and narrowed and grimly focused on the task of not failing, looked straight at it, and didn't see it. Further in, another giant notice offered a cash prize to anyone who told the experimenter they'd spotted it. The unlucky people missed that too. The luck was printed on the page for everyone. Only one group's nervous system was relaxed enough to let it through. This is the final mechanism, and it's the one that should give you a reason to stand up. The brain that expects catastrophe narrows. It tunnels. It scans for threat and screens out everything else, including the open door, the unexpected ally, the opportunity sitting in plain sight in giant type. The pessimist isn't unlucky. He has trained his attention to filter out exactly the evidence that would prove him wrong, which means the good things may already be happening to you, and you cannot see them for the same reason. The unlucky counted right past the answer. Your forecast of scarcity has narrowed your aperture until the windfall falls outside the frame. Widen the aperture and the world does not actually change. Your access to it does. The opportunities were always printed on the page. The thing you mistook for fate. Go back to the dogs for the last time. The ones who lay down on the electrified floor with the exit inches away were not cursed. They were not weaker animals. They were carrying a conclusion from a day that was already over into a situation where that conclusion was no longer true. And the only thing keeping them on the floor was their certainty that the floor was all there was. You have been doing the same thing and you didn't know it had a name. The dread you carry is a prediction, not a prophecy. The certainty that the good thing won't happen for you specifically is a wound that learned to sound like wisdom. The flatness, the narrowed vision, the exhausting sense that effort vanishes into nothing, none of it is a report on your future. All of it is a report on a prediction engine that was programmed by people and events that have no jurisdiction over what happens next. And every mechanism we walked through is a door in that wall. The thought you can prosecute, the dopamine you can relocate into the effort, the identity you can rebuild in a room no one is watching, the aperture you can widen until the evidence finally gets through. You are not waiting to win. You have been winning in ways your own brain refused to show you, because it was too busy bracing for a loss it had already decided was coming. Stop taking dictation from the part of you that learned to give up. It is not lying to be cruel. It is doing the only thing it knows how to do, predicting the past and calling it the future. Here's the thought I want to leave sitting in your chest. The barrier was always a few inches high. The only thing that ever kept you on the floor was the certainty that there was no point in jumping. And certainty, of all the things you own, is the one most worth interrogating, because the most dangerous lies are never the ones other people tell you. They're the ones you stopped questioning a long time ago. Now get up. The gate is open. It always was.